everyone, and welcome to DQ Deep Tech. We have with us Mr. Trivikram Prasad, who is the marketplace leader, India leader for Red Hat, and he's also a lead mentor with NASSCOM Deep Tech Club. Adding another feather to the cap, he is a student mentor volunteer with the New York Academy of Sciences. Welcome, sir. Thank you for taking time out for this interaction.
Thank you. Thanks for calling me.
Yes. So, Trivikram, could you start off by telling us a little bit about how your transition to mentoring was and what was that journey all about?
Sure. So my experience has always been in product development and product engineering for more than 2.5 decades. And I had my own startup also at in about 2010-11. I had a startup for a few years, and it was a struggle like any other startup. And I've gone through the journey, and with my own knowledge of technology and engineering skills I have, uh, was looking at sharing my knowledge, my learnings, things that I failed at that I think I could have done better, right? And it was a way for me to give back some of my learnings and experiences to new startups. And I got in, actually, somebody in NASSCOM got in touch with me, and because informally I was already helping a few startups, people that I know or people who come through networks, and this was a more organized and formal way to help out uh, in a very larger ecosystem. So that's kind of how I got into mentoring.
That's amazing. So you must have mentored a few startups on your way. Tell us about
Yes,
those and what strategy have you enlisted to help them out? How do you figure out the pain points and how do you go about in solving them?
sure. So every startup is different. I think as a mentor, you need to realize that there is no one size fits all. You cannot give, for lack of a better word, you can't give like high level yarn, right? And
Mm,
expect that it's going to work. So it's very important for the mentor to understand the overall needs of the startup, where they are at, some of their pain points, and understand their journey also, right? And the context of what they're working at. And you also need to know that every startup, obviously, they have done their own homework. So there's no point in telling them what they already know.
mm,
And what's more important is to identify the areas which are either a blind spot for them,
mm,
right? Or things that they have not thought of just because they're so much in the weeds, right? Because they are in the work they're doing, they're very deeply involved. So sometimes they don't step out. So what I bring is more of an objective view and
mm.
being very realistic thing. And it's not like I want to be nice all the time. I mean, nice in the sense I'm not going to tell them what they want to hear. So that doesn't help a startup. So understanding the pain point, not just from their perspective, but also pain points which they might not have considered. Okay,
Mm.
so that those are the important areas to unravel or actually dig out, and this can only happen through multiple conversations and understanding the domain they are in, talking to their customers. So there's a lot of groundwork that happens. It's not just a question of going and talking to a mentor, and it's not a one-way conversation. And there are times that you also hear something which will change your own point of view. So I think it's always good to ensure that you are open-minded in listening to a point of view which may not match what you had in mind. So
Correct.
those are some of the things that are important. And like I said, going back to that, like being very clear on addressing a specific area that they need help on.
Mm,
Either they realize it or they don't realize it, and just talking about that and not saying that things like, oh, if you do this, you'll be fine, or companies in your industry have done this. Those things don't work. You
mm,
have to be very clear saying, do these three things and by this timeline, and why are you doing this, and what will you gain from it. The how part is something that I very rarely get into unless they ask me,
mm.
because they are good at execution. Right? Most startups, they are very good. And like I said, every startup is different and where they are. Some are early stage, some have been in the industry for a while, some are new to the industry. So based on that, as a mentor, I have to adapt on what exactly they need.
Correct. So no high level gyan and clear communication and being open minded to summarize
Yes.
your points. Yes,
Yeah.
those are some good points. Yes. So when it comes to deep tech ecosystem, and you have had a ringside view of deep tech ecosystem and its evolution for some time now, what are the opportunities that you envision for the upcoming startups and for mentors like yourself?
Sure. See, from a startup perspective, right, just kind of want to step back a little bit. So if you look at deep tech from a conceptual standpoint, a lot of companies say implement a chatbot or some kind of a chat interface and call themselves deep tech. And really, and also a lot of companies which are aggregators, right? Either they are doing food aggregation or whatever, cab aggregation. So I think those are all tried and tested, and that's really not deep tech. Right? So
Mm,
what we need to unravel from Indian deep tech is addressing very specific pain points from the Indian consumer, and obviously it can go global later, right? Which are technology intensive. When I say technology intensive, it is actually implementing algorithms, not using something off the shelf and calling yourself deep tech. I'm not saying you should not do that. However, if you want to be considered deep tech, you should be having IP and intelligence that you are producing for your product. Right? It's not something that's available off the shelf, and and they should be addressing a very specific customer need or a customer pain point, and that technology should be something that's sustainable also, right? It's not something that you just do today and then tomorrow you go on to something else. An evolution of technology is different. However, your fundamental technology that you're using should be very strong. And when we say deep tech, it's more about getting deep into technology. It's not a magic word or anything of that sort, right? It just means that getting deep into the technology that you are working on. It could be AI, it could be blockchain, it could be data science, it could be any area. However, the depth of the solution
mm,
is highly technology based, and this is IP that the startup actually has
okay.
created. So that's from a startup standpoint.
Mm,
From a mentor standpoint, it's important to have a pulse of the industry,
mm,
right? From where things are in terms of technology, in terms of where the markets are at, right? To have a good understanding of what the current state of technology is, and more importantly, to know what technology is applicable where. And it's not a good mentor should have be agnostic to technology. It should be like, oh, I love Java or I love whatever, right? I love Amazon services. I'm going to only recommend Amazon. So it's more about adapting to say, okay, for this particular startup, for their need,
mm,
what is the right technology, what really works for them. And it could be multiple factors. It could be a cost factor, it could be a scale factor, it could be a customer base factor. So you need to account, or you need to take into account multiple factors, and then you make technology recommendations. It's not just because you like something. Right? So
yeah.
I think as a mentor, you need to always put on a hat of being objective about
Mm.
technology.
This also brings home the point of uh, your attribute of being open minded, both for
Of
the
course.
innovator and also the mentor. Thank you for sharing that. And let's talk about the elephant in the room that's been there for a year now. How has COVID-19 been transformational in the shift, and how have deep tech innovators adapted to it? And what has been your advice and role in mentoring them through that shift?
Sure, sure. So there was a startup that I mentored just end of last year, an
Okay.
oncology based startup. So what they were doing was looking at X-rays and looking at basically drawings of patients' cancer cells to detect cancer cells. And because of COVID, their business was affected just because the top priority was not what they were looking at.
Mm,
And what I suggested to them was to actually redirect their work to start looking or start helping out with the COVID ecosystem, saying that is there a way they can repurpose their software
mm,
or the application to help out with detection of COVID.
mm,
And they were able to do that, and they were able to add it to what they already had
mm,
as a solution. They changed their workflows a little bit. That actually they got have got if they were doing what they were doing and if there's no pandemic. So overall, it did work out to be a positive experience for them because they were able to gain new set of customers which they had not probably thought of going after earlier.
Okay.
Any solution, while it has its downsides, I think like it's always important to understand and try to figure out where you can actually help out or what kind of areas you can actually start working on in that situation. So that's from a business perspective, right? And what can also you can also leverage with what's happening is you don't have to necessarily be dependent on a physical location for people to work from,
Mm.
right? So you can actually use you can utilize people from anywhere in the world pretty much now, because that's kind of become how we work now, that it's no more tied to a physical location. So
Yes.
you probably also have a larger pool of people that can you can work with. Obviously there are challenges with remote working and people working in disparate geographies. However, I think it's really up to you on how you want to make that work, right? And you can always balance out what you need. So those are some of the areas that I feel you can still gain some
Mm.
traction in your companies, just looking for opportunities, whether it's in terms of people, new business opportunities, all right, or even different new ways of working. And so yeah, there's always a chance, there's always uh, upside to anything that comes out.
That's great. That's great. There's always hope. Yes. Um, so Trivikram, when it comes to deep tech ecosystem, what skills do you think are of great importance now for the innovators and people looking to experiment and get into the deep tech ecosystem to establish a foothold going forward?
Yeah, this goes back to my earlier point, right? Just first of all, to identify an area which requires a technology solution and not try to force fit a technology solution to a problem statement, right? You really need to make sure that what solution you have is actually relevant in terms of the amount of technology that's being used. It's not about just I'm going to throw in all the technology that I know into this and then see what happens. Right? So it's being very mindful about technologies that you use and understanding the business or the customer base that you're going after. Right? And if you have that customer focus, and if you work backwards in the sense customer first, and then you figure out what solutions you can provide, and then also look at saying that once you have a solution for a set of customers, who else can you address with your solution, right? And that's kind of the next step. So see how we can continue to expand not just the customer base but even the profile of customers you are going after. So that's important, to have that inquisitive mindset, the learning mindset, and obviously to know the technology aspects well enough to know what fits and what doesn't. I think
Mm.
so, because the other thing I would caution a lot of startups is not to just mimic a technology solution that's available in the West.
Mm.
A lot of technology, a lot of products that are available or that are coming from startups or even large companies in the West don't really translate well into an Indian uh, environment,
Okay.
right? Because for example, there's a lot of dependence on say available networks,
Mm.
24 by 7 availability, mobile networks. So there are multiple areas, especially in the rural sector, whether it's in agriculture or home or farm loans, whatever it is, right? There where we don't even have such problems of this magnitude in the West,
Mm.
right? I mean, I saw a startup which was working on drones to drop medicines off in rural areas in the country, right?
Mm.
That's something you will never have a need for in the US, for example. Like,
Mm.
there's nothing like a rural area which is inaccessible by road. Pretty much everything is. So there are, I think that's important to understand, saying that let's look at what is relevant here rather than just copying a solution. Oh, this product is doing really well
Mm.
somewhere else, so let's kind of mimic the same functionality here. So
Mm.
that is not a scalable solution, and it's usually doesn't take you too far along because it really doesn't fit into the context. And what we end up doing is saying that okay, let's try to force fit this solution into what we need in India. For example, if India is the customer, and when I say India, I mean a lot of Asian countries have similar types of needs and requirements and the kind of solutions they need,
Yeah.
right? So it's always good to look at the relevance and the context before jumping into a solution.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yes, always bring in the Indian context for the
Okay.
solutions that you want to experiment with. Yes. So thank you so much, Trivikram. That was great, and it was nice talking to you. Thank you for taking time out for this interaction.